The morning Alara Calloway turned 18, the state of Connecticut stopped being responsible for her. There was no cake, no song, no one standing at the front desk of the Grayson Group home with anything that resembled warmth. Just a cardboard box at her feet, the kind that once held printer paper, now holding the entire weight of her childhood. 3 folded shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a toothbrush wrapped in a paper towel, 4 paperback novels with cracked spines, a pair of wool socks her father had given her on her 13th birthday, the last birthday he had been well enough to give her anything. And at the very bottom, wrapped in an old hand towel, a small picture frame made of cherry wood. Her father had built it for her when she was 6. Cherry darkens with age, he had told her. Gets richer, like a good story. The photograph inside was 10 years old. Her father had been dead for 3. Outside October in Hartford was doing what October in Hartford always does, reminding you that whatever softness summer offered is gone, and the bill is now due. A cold wind pushed against the front door. The light through the windows was the gray of weak coffee, the kind of light that doesn't seem to come from any particular sun. And tucked inside the manila envelope the caseworker handed her beneath a birth certificate and a check for $175, the state's official farewell to a girl who had aged out of mattering, was a second envelope, cream-colored, heavy. From a law firm in a town she had not allowed herself to think about in 3 years. The town where she had once been a daughter. The morning Alara Calloway turned 18, the state of Connecticut stopped being responsible for her. There was no cake, no song. No one standing at the front desk of the Grayson Group home with anything that resembled warmth. Just a cardboard box at her feet, the kind that once held printer paper, now holding the entire weight of her childhood. 3 folded shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a toothbrush wrapped in a paper towel, 4 paperback novels with cracked spines, a pair of wool socks her father had given her on her 13th birthday, the last birthday he had been well enough to give her anything. And at the very bottom, wrapped in an old hand towel, a small picture frame made of cherry wood. Her father had built it for her when she was 6. Cherry darkens with age, he had told her. Gets richer, like a good story. The photograph inside was taken at the Harlan County Fair the summer she turned 8. She was on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something the camera never caught. The sky behind them was the kind of impossible blue you only see in late August in New England. His hands were wrapped around her ankles, calloused and broad. The hands of a man who had built things for a living. That photograph was 10 years old now. Her father had been gone for 3. The radiator in the foyer ticked and hissed. Outside October in Hartford was doing what October in Hartford always does, which is to remind you that whatever softness summer offered is gone, and the bill is now due. A cold wind pushed against the front door of the group home, rattling the screen. The light coming through the foyer windows was the gray of weak coffee, the kind of light that does not seem to come from any particular sun. Mrs. Hartley stood in the doorway with a clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. She had been Alara's caseworker for the last 2 years. Her hair was the color of damp ash. Her glasses sat low on her nose. She wore the same gray cardigan every Tuesday and Thursday. And Alara had often wondered in the long, flat afternoons of group therapy and locked snack cabinets whether the cardigan was a uniform or simply a flag of surrender. "That is it, then," Mrs. Hartley said. Her voice was flat, not unkind, just worn down to the wood like a banister that had been gripped by too many hands. She held out a large manila envelope. Alara took it. Inside was the entire architecture of her existence. A birth certificate, a social security card, a photocopy of her state ID, a printout of her medical records, a folded list of phone numbers for crisis hotlines and emergency clinics, and tucked into one corner, a single check made out in the amount of $175. The state's farewell, the official severance package for a girl who had aged out of mattering. "There is a bed for you at the Northside shelter," Mrs. Hartley said. "It is paid for 1 week. After that, you will work with their counselors to find employment. Bus ticket is inside the envelope." Alara nodded. She did not trust her voice to do anything more than that. The linoleum under her shoes was the color of weak tea. The walls were the color of weaker tea. The air smelled the way it had smelled every single day for the last 730 days, which was the smell of industrial bleach laid over the ghost of boiled vegetables. She had counted those days. She had counted them the way prisoners count days, scratching them into the soft pine of her bed frame with a paper clip she had found behind a dresser. 730. 2 full years in this house. And 1 year before that in a different house in Bridgeport that she did not like to think about. A year of fluorescent lights in a basement rec room. A year of a roommate who cried in her sleep. A year of learning that some kinds of silence were a survival strategy. 3 years total, a small lifetime. Mrs. Hartley cleared her throat. There was something else in her hand. A second envelope. This one was different. The paper was cream-colored, heavy. The kind of paper you could feel the weight of before you even read the words on it. It had a watermark visible in the morning light, a delicate scrollwork too fine to read. The name typed on the front was Alara Calloway, and beneath that in smaller letters, care of Grayson Group Home, Hartford, Connecticut. The return address read, Whitmore and Associates Attorneys at Law, Ashford, Connecticut. Ashford. The word landed in Alara's chest the way a stone lands in a still pond. The ripples went out slow and wide. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. She had not allowed herself to think it. Not really. Not the way you think about a place you can return to. Ashford was where she had been a daughter. Ashford was where she had been a sister before sister meant what it had come to mean. Ashford was the smell of fresh-cut grass and the sound of a screen door slamming and her father's pickup truck idling in the gravel drive, while he hummed along to whatever was on the radio. She did not belong to Ashford anymore. She had been quietly, surgically, completely removed from it. "It came yesterday," Mrs. Hartley said. "From a law firm. I do not know what it is about." Ilara took the envelope. It was heavier than it should have been. She slid it carefully into the manila envelope with the rest of her paperwork. She would not open it here. Whatever this was, it would not be witnessed by the pale green walls of this foyer. It would not be born inside the smell of bleach. "Good luck, Ilara," Mrs. Hartley said. And for the first time in 2 years, something almost human moved across the woman's face. A flicker of warmth. A wish. "You are tougher than you think you are," she said. Ilara wanted to believe her. She really did. But as she pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out into the bite of a Hartford morning, she did not feel tough. She felt like a piece of paper in a wind that did not care which direction it carried her. The door closed behind her. The lock clicked. She did not turn around. The bus depot was 2 blocks east. She walked the distance with the cardboard box pressed against her hip, the manila envelope tucked under her arm. Her coat was too thin for the weather. It had been too thin last winter, too. She had a pair of gloves in her pocket, but did not put them on. She wanted to feel her fingers. She wanted to feel something. The wind pushed yellow leaves across the sidewalk in front of her. They moved like small, frightened animals. She passed a coffee shop where 2 men in business suits were sitting at a window table laughing at something on a laptop screen. She passed a small barber shop with a striped pole that did not turn anymore. She passed a vacant storefront with a yellowing "For Lease" sign in the window. She did not look at any of it for long. Looking too long at the world of normal people who had homes and jobs and reasons to laugh was a thing she had learned at 15 to stop doing. At the depot, she sat down on a metal bench under a fluorescent light that hummed like an old refrigerator. The bench was cold through her jeans. A woman across the waiting area was talking to herself in a low, steady voice that rose and fell like prayer. Ilara did not open the cream envelope. Not yet. She set the cardboard box on her lap. She folded her hands on top of it. She tried to make herself very small. The bus rolled in at 6:42. She climbed aboard, found a window seat near the back, slid the cardboard box into the empty seat beside her like a passenger. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched Hartford begin to slide past her smear by smear. Brick buildings, boarded-up storefronts, a diner with a neon sign that said, "Open," even though the windows were dark. A man pushing a shopping cart full of aluminum cans across a 4-lane road, taking his time daring traffic to find him. A church with a sign out front that read, "God is not finished with you yet." Ilara looked at that sign for a long second before the bus carried her past it. The bus turned onto the interstate. The city fell away, and Ilara for the first time took out the cream-colored envelope and looked at it. Her hands were shaking. She did not pretend otherwise. The shaking was small but persistent, the way the surface of a glass of water shakes when a truck goes past your house. She slid her thumb under the flap and broke the seal. The letter inside was a single sheet of the same heavy paper. The letterhead read, "Whitmore and Associates," in a dark green that looked almost black. The text was typed. The signature at the bottom was handwritten in slow blue ink. "Dear Ms. Calloway," the letter began. "This correspondence is to inform you of a matter pertaining to the final will and testament of your late father, Mr. Thomas Calloway. While the principal assets of the estate were dispersed in accordance with probate court rulings approximately 3 years ago, a codicil to the will pertaining to you specifically has now come into effect upon the occasion of your 18th birthday." Elara stopped reading. Her breath caught somewhere in the top of her lungs and would not move. A codicil, just for her. A part that had been waiting all this time. She had been told there was nothing. She had been told in a small, windowless conference room 3 years ago by a man in a gray suit she had never seen before and would never see again, that her father's illness had eaten the estate alive. That medical bills were a kind of fire, and that her brothers Dominic and Marcus had done their best to protect the family from the flames, but that everything else had to be sold. The house, the business, the land, all of it burned up. "We are sorry. There is nothing left for you." Dominic had said it. Dominic, in a charcoal suit, his face arranged into the kind of solemn expression you practice in a mirror. He had been 29 years old, already the shape of the man he was becoming, already wearing the suit like he had earned it instead of inherited the closet it came from. Marcus had stood beside him with his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. Marcus, who had always stood half a step behind Dominic, who had always been the agreement to Dominic's idea, who had nodded along to every decision his older brother had ever made for as long as Elara could remember. There is nothing left. Elara had been 15 years old. She had not understood probate. She had not understood codicils. She had understood only that her father was gone, and that her brothers, who were grown men, who were capable of feeding her and keeping her and being her family, did not want to. She had been put in a car driven by a stranger. She had been driven north into Hartford. The car had smelled like cigarettes and pine air freshener, and the cheap upholstery of a state vehicle that had carried too many children to too many wrong places. That was the last time she had seen Dominic or Marcus. She forced her eyes back to the letter. "Pursuant to your father's specific instructions, a single property held in a separate trust is hereby transferred to your name upon your attainment of legal majority. This property is identified in Harlan County records. Lot 7B, comprising the detached carriage house and adjoining 1/10 acre, located at the northeast corner of the original Calloway estate at 412 Oak Haven Lane, Ashford, Connecticut. The carriage house." Elara closed her eyes. She knew the carriage house. Of course she knew it. Everyone who had grown up at 412 Oakhaven Lane knew it. It was the small brick building at the far back of the property, half buried in maples and overgrown shrubs, where her father had once kept his oldest tools. The downstairs had been a workshop and a garage. The upstairs had been a tiny apartment that no one had lived in since before she was born. The slate roof was sagging. The windows were boarded. The ivy had been eating it slowly for 50 years. Her brothers had gotten the main house, the 5-bedroom colonial with the wraparound porch, the investment accounts, the construction firm her father had built from nothing with his own hands in his own lifetime. The firm whose name had once been painted on the side of his pickup truck. Callaway Building Company, founded 1989, bonded and insured. She had gotten the shed. A laugh escaped her. It was a small, ugly sound. The woman 2 seats up turned her head. Of course, this was the joke. This was exactly the kind of joke the universe seemed to find amusing. They had taken everything, every brick and every dollar and every name, and they had left her a ruin. They had left her a debt with walls. She read on. Please be advised that the property is conveyed as is, with all associated liabilities, including delinquent property taxes currently owed to Harlan County in the amount of approximately $800. The trust contains no liquid assets. The deed and key, as your father directed, are accessible at the property itself in a manner which has been communicated to this office. We advise you to contact our firm at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer and your intentions regarding the property. Sincerely, Gerald Whitmore, Esquire. $800 in back taxes. Elara looked down at the manila envelope in her lap. $175 in state severance. She did the math in her head, even though there was no math to do. The math had already been done for her by men in offices in towns she had not been allowed to enter. She crumpled the letter in her fist. The paper was thick enough that it resisted. It crackled. She pressed her forehead against the cold window of the bus and stared at the trees blurring past the sumac going red, and the maples going yellow, and the oaks still hanging on stubborn the way oaks always are. For a long moment, she let the anger have her. She let herself picture Dominic in their father's leather armchair, drinking their father's good Scotch, his shoes off, and his feet on their father's coffee table. She let herself picture Marcus smaller, quieter, hovering at the edge of every room their father had loved, agreeing to whatever Dominic said the way he always had. She let herself picture them laughing about the carriage house, about the joke of it, about the cleverness of giving the broken girl the broken building. She let the anger fill her up to the back of her teeth. And then slowly, she made herself read the letter again. Pursuant to your father's specific instructions. Not Dominic's instructions. Not Marcus's instructions. Her father's. Thomas Callaway. The man who had taught her when she was 8 years old how to drive a 16-penny nail in 3 strokes without bending it. The man who had let her ride on his shoulders at the county fair, his hands warm around her ankles. The man who had called her spark plug because she could not stop asking questions, because every answer he gave her birthed 3 more because she lit up every room she walked into. And he had said more than once that the light was the best thing he had ever made. That man had written a will, and that man had put the carriage house in a separate trust on purpose with her name on it, and had left instructions that she was not to be told about it until she turned 18. That man had done this to her. For her. Why? She uncrumpled the letter on her knee. She smoothed it as best she could with the side of her hand. She read it a 3rd time. There was a phone number printed at the bottom beneath the signature. Ashford area code. She pulled the cheap flip phone Mrs. Hartley had given her out of her coat pocket. 100 prepaid minutes. A line to the world. Her fingers shook as she dialed. The phone rang twice. Whitmore and Associates, a woman said. Her voice was clean and cool. The voice of a person who answered phones in a building that had crown molding. My name is Elara Calloway, Elara said. Her own voice sounded very small to her. Very young. I would like to speak with Mr. Whitmore, please. There was a pause. She expected the brush off. She expected to be told he was in a meeting. She expected to be handed off to a paralegal, to be asked to leave a message, to be asked to call back during regular business hours. Instead, the woman said, "One moment, please. He has been expecting your call." The line clicked. A new voice came on. Older, lower. The voice of a man who had been a man for a long time. The voice of someone's grandfather. Ms. Calloway, he said. This is Gerald Whitmore. I am glad to hear from you. Elara did not know what to say. She had not prepared a speech. She had not prepared anything. I got your letter, she said finally. Yes, he said. I am sorry it had to come the way it did. I wish your father had let me deliver it in person. He was very specific about the terms. It is a ruin, she said. The words came out before she could stop them. I remember it. It is a ruin, and there are taxes. I have $175. I do not understand what I am supposed to do. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was not an impatient silence. It was the silence of a man who was choosing his words. Elara, he said, and the use of her first name surprised her. Your father was a very particular man. He was also, as you may already suspect, a very deliberate man. He set up that trust 5 years before he passed. He gave me my instructions in a single afternoon in my office, and he did not waver from them once. He said, you were resourceful. He said you always knew how to find what mattered. She closed her eyes. What does that mean? She asked. I do not know, he said. He did not tell me. He only told me to give you the deed and to point you toward the key. The rest, he said, was up to you. That is all I am permitted to say. That is the entirety of my instruction. The key, she said. Where is the key? At the property, behind the electrical meter on the rear exterior wall. There is a small magnetic lockbox. He told me he wanted you to find it the way he would have found it. He did not want it mailed to you. He did not want it sitting in my desk. He wanted you to walk up to that building and put your hand on it yourself. She pressed the phone against her ear. Her eyes burned. The taxes, she said. How long do I have? The county will send a final notice in the coming weeks. From the date of that notice, you will have 90 days to pay before they seize the property and put it up for tax auction. 90 days. 90 days, Alara. She heard the depot announcement in the back of her mind. The bus pulling into the next stop. She heard the hiss of the brakes. She looked up. Through the front windshield, she could see the green sign of the Northside shelter. She could see on the corner a woman holding a small child by the wrist, both of them looking tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. That was where she was supposed to get off. That was the bed for 1 week. After that, you will work with their counselors to find employment. After that, after that, after that. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Yes. Thank you, she said. For what? For the information. I will be in touch. She closed the phone. The bus rolled to a stop at the Northside shelter. The doors hissed open. A man in a frayed coat shuffled down the aisle and stepped off. The driver looked into the rearview mirror, eyebrows raised, waiting. Alara did not move. She sat there with the cream envelope in one hand and the manila envelope in the other, and the cardboard box in the seat beside her. She did not move. Outside, the sky had gone the color of pewter. A few drops of rain hit the bus window and slid down at an angle. The driver looked over his shoulder. Northside, miss, he said. This is your stop, is it not? Alara looked at him. No, she said. Her voice did not shake this time. It was not loud. It was not brave. It was just hers. This is not my stop. She stood up. She tucked both envelopes inside her coat. She lifted the cardboard box. She walked down the aisle past the driver and stepped off the bus, but only because the next bus, the one she actually needed, did not leave from this depot. She would have to walk 3 blocks to the regional terminal. She walked those 3 blocks in the rain. The water ran down her hair and into the collar of her thin coat. The cardboard box began to soften at the corners. She did not run. She did not duck under awnings. She walked the 3 blocks at the same steady pace, the way she had once watched her father walk through a thunderstorm to finish a job he had promised to finish that day. The way a person walks when they have decided for the first time in a long time that the rain is not the most powerful thing in the equation. When she got to the regional terminal, she put her box down on a bench, peeled the manila envelope open, and counted out $42 in $5 bills and a handful of singles. It was almost a quarter of everything she had in the world. She slid the money under the glass at the ticket window. The woman behind the glass looked at her wet hair, at her thin coat, at her cardboard box. "Where to, honey?" the woman said. Ashford, Alara said. The woman blinked. She typed something into a computer that looked at least a decade old. "One way?" the woman asked. Alara thought about that question for a long time. A one-way ticket to the place that had given birth to her and the place that had thrown her away. A one-way ticket to a town where her father was buried and her brothers were rich, and the only thing waiting for her was a roof that was probably going to fall in on her head before she could figure out what to do with the building underneath it. "One way," she said. The ticket slid back under the glass. She tucked it into her coat pocket next to the cream envelope and the manila envelope and the $133 she had left. The bus to Ashford boarded at 11. She sat in the depot for 2 hours and watched the clock on the wall and tried not to think. She thought anyway. She thought about her father. She thought about the way he had smelled, which was a mixture of cedar shavings and Old Spice and the faintest trace of pencil lead, because he was always carrying a carpenter's pencil behind his ear. She thought about the truck radio he had loved, an AM dial that only really worked when you held the antenna at a certain angle. She thought about the way he had taught her to measure twice and cut once. And then after she had made her first bad cut at the age of 9, the way he had taken her aside and said gently, "Spark plug. Sometimes you measure 3 times. Sometimes you measure 4. There is no shame in being sure." She thought about the day he had told her he was sick. She had been 13. He had sat her down on the porch swing of the Colonial on Oak Haven Lane. He had held her hand. He had said the word cancer the way other people might say the word weather. Just a fact. Just something to be reckoned with. He had been sick for 2 years. She had been with him for almost all of it. She had read to him. She had brought him water. She had watched him get smaller and smaller. Her brothers had been there too at first, and then less, and then almost not at all. Dominic had been busy with the company. Marcus had been busy with whatever Dominic told him to be busy with. In the last months, Dominic came around almost every day. He brought paperwork. He brought a briefcase. He sat at her father's bedside with a pen and a stack of forms and talked in a low voice. And her father, foggy with morphine, signed whatever Dominic put in front of him. Alara had been 15. She had not understood any of it then. She wondered now what she had been watching. The bus to Ashford boarded at 11 and pulled out of the regional terminal at 11:04, 3 minutes late, the way all buses are. Alara sat by the window again. The rain had stopped. The clouds had broken open and the sun was coming through them in long, pale shafts that lit up the brown October fields outside the city. She watched Hartford fall behind her. She watched the highway widen and then narrow. She watched the exit signs change. She watched the suburbs come up around the bus like a tide. The houses got bigger. The lawns got greener even in October. The trees got older. The cars in the driveways got newer. She thought about her mother for a moment, the way she sometimes did on long rides. Her mother had died in a car accident on the Merritt Parkway on a wet night in early spring when Alara was 3. Alara did not remember her. What she remembered was a photograph in a silver frame on her father's dresser. A woman in a yellow sundress, a small smile, dark hair pinned back from her face. What she remembered was her father sometimes on long winter evenings looking at that photograph for a long time and then putting it back down very carefully and going to make dinner. She wondered if her mother would have known what to do about all of this. She wondered if there was a different version of the story in which her mother had not died, in which there had been someone in the house when her father got sick who could have seen what Dominic was doing, who could have stopped it. She let herself wonder for a minute. Then she stopped wondering. Wondering about her mother was a soft road that led nowhere she could afford to go. By the time the bus reached the Ashford exit, Alara had not spoken to another human being in 2.5 hours. The depot in Ashford was small. A single platform, a wooden bench, a sign with the town's name carved into it. The carving had been done by hand. She recognized the lettering. The Ashford Historical Society had commissioned that sign in 2009, and her father had volunteered to do the carving, and she had sat in his workshop watching him do it. She remembered the curl of the A, the way his thumb had braced the chisel. She stood in front of the sign for a long time. Then she lifted her cardboard box and she started walking. Oak Haven Lane was 2 miles from the depot. She walked the entire distance with her box under her arm and her envelopes against her chest. She walked past the small downtown, where the bookstore still had its old wooden sign, and the bakery on the corner was still selling rye bread, the way it had been doing since before she was born. She walked past the library where she had spent her Saturdays as a child, where she had picked up her first chapter book. She walked past the park where her father had taught her to ride a bicycle on a summer evening in 2014, where he had run alongside her, holding the back of the seat, until he was not holding it anymore, and she had ridden by herself for 30 feet before she had even realized he had let go. She walked all of it. She did not cry. There would be time for crying. She passed the old Episcopal church where her father had been buried. She slowed for a moment in front of the wrought iron gate of the cemetery, but she did not go in. Not today. Today was not for that. Today was for finding the place he had left her and stepping into it and seeing whether the roof would hold. She kept walking. The houses on Oak Haven Lane were old in the way that money makes things old. White colonials with black shutters. Stone walls along the property lines. Lawns the color of pool tables. Sugar maples planted in the 1800s, their branches reaching across the road to touch the branches of the maples on the opposite side. The air smelled like wood smoke and cut grass. She had grown up here. She had been a girl here. She had ridden her bicycle down the middle of this exact stretch of asphalt and waved at the postman and known every mailbox by the name on it. She did not belong to any of it anymore. She rounded the curve at the top of the lane, and there it was, 412 Oak Haven Lane. It was bigger than she remembered. It was also more beautiful than she remembered. And that, more than anything, was the wound. The colonial had been freshly painted. The white was almost too white. The black shutters were glossy. The front door was a deep, rich red, and there was a brass knocker on it shaped like a lion's head, and that knocker had not been there when her father had lived in this house. The lawn had been recently rolled. The boxwoods along the front path had been clipped into perfect green pillows. There were 2 cars in the circular driveway. A black BMW sedan, a silver Range Rover. The house looked like a magazine. Her father had built that porch with his own hands. He had laid the brick on the front walk himself. He had hung the heavy oak beam over the doorway, and he had carved his initials and the year into the back of it, where no one would ever see them. TCC 1993, the year he had bought the property and started the renovation that had taken him 3 years to finish. And now Dominic lived here. Dominic, who had never picked up a hammer in his life. Dominic, who had hired a contractor to paint the shutters because the very idea of doing it himself had probably never crossed his mind. The lights were on in the front windows. Someone was home. Elara did not stop walking. She did not slow down. She moved past the front of the property as if she had every right to be on this lane, as if she were just another person heading somewhere else. She turned right at the property line and followed the long gravel driveway that ran along the side of the lot. It had been a service drive once used for groundskeepers and deliveries. Now it was overgrown. The gravel was almost completely covered in weeds. The hedges on either side had been allowed to grow tall, taller than her head, so that the drive became a kind of green tunnel, narrow and shaded. The farther in she walked, the less of the house she could see, and she understood now that this was the point. Whoever was maintaining the front of the colonial was very deliberately not maintaining the back. The gardener who clipped the boxwoods into pillows did not come down this drive. The contractor who painted the shutters did not paint anything that lived back here. The carriage house had been allowed to disappear. She came around the last bend, and there it was. The brick was darker than she remembered, almost black in places, the way old brick gets when it has not been repointed in 50 years. The ivy had climbed up the entire east wall and was reaching for the roof. 2 of the upstairs windows were boarded with weathered plywood. The slate roof sagged in the middle in the soft, tired way of an old animal lying down. The little garden that had once run along the south side of the building was gone. Where her father had grown tomatoes and beans, there was now only a tangle of brown weeds and a single rusted bird feeder hanging from a sumac tree. The whole building was wrapped in silence. It looked like something a town would tear down for safety reasons. It looked like what people meant when they said the word forgotten. Elara stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it for a long time. She set down her cardboard box. She wiped her hands on her jeans, even though her hands were dry. She walked around to the back of the building. The electrical meter was exactly where Gerald Whitmore had said it would be. It was bolted into the brick, an old round meter with a glass face. Behind it, just as he had described, was a small black box held in place by a magnet. Elara reached up. Her fingers were cold. She had to feel for it twice before she found it. The box came free with a small metallic click. Inside, nestled on a square of crumbling yellow foam, was a single key. It was brass, heavy, old. The kind of key that did not exist anymore, with a thick shaft and a deep cut and a head shaped like a clover. She closed her hand around it. The metal was cold. It warmed in her palm. She walked back around to the front of the carriage house, to the heavy wooden door at the side. The door was oak. It had been beautiful once. The grain still showed under the weather. There were iron bands across it, hand-forged, and the strap hinges were the kind that had been made in someone's blacksmith shop in a year that started with 18. She slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first. She put her shoulder against it. She turned with both hands. There was a low, deep grinding sound from somewhere inside the door. The sound of a mechanism that had not moved in a very long time, finding somehow that it could still move. The bolt slid back. The door swung inward slowly on hinges that complained but did not break. The smell came first. It was the smell of damp earth and old wood and dust that had been undisturbed for years. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed up. It was the smell of time. Elara stepped inside. It took her eyes a moment to adjust. The only light came from two small, dust-streaked windows on the south wall, and what made it through them was the color of weak tea. Beyond the windows, she could see the silhouette of the maple branches outside moving in the wind. The ground floor was open, one large room with a high ceiling that went all the way up to the rafters. The original horse stalls were still there along the north wall, two of them, the wooden uprights gone gray with age. Hand tools hung from a pegboard near the back. A pyramid of cracked clay flower pots sat in one corner. A wheelbarrow with one flat tire leaned against a workbench that was almost entirely covered in dust. Her father's workbench. She knew it without question. She had spent hours sitting on a wooden stool next to that workbench when she was a child, watching her father plane down boards by hand. She knew the dent at the corner where he had dropped a hammer once. She knew the shallow burn mark where he had set down a soldering iron and forgotten about it. She knew the faint ring stains from coffee cups he had set down and picked back up 1,000 times. It was all here, like a museum no one had visited. On the workbench, half buried under a layer of dust, she saw it. A small leather-bound notebook no bigger than a man's palm. She picked it up. The leather was soft and cracked and smelled like linseed oil and age. She opened the first page. Her father's handwriting, tilted slightly to the right. the lowercase letters small and neat, the capitals a little bigger than they needed to be. Measure twice, cut once, sometimes measure 3, sometimes 4. There is no shame in being sure. The words he had spoken to her when she was 9 years old, written in his own hand, waiting for her in the dark. She closed the notebook. She pressed it against her chest. She took another step in, and then she stopped. She stopped because something on the floor in front of her was wrong. The dust on the ground was thick, years thick, inches in places. She could see her own footprints already forming behind her dark spots against the gray. The dust was a record. It had not been disturbed in a very long time. Except in one place there was a path, a narrow path of disturbed dust running from the front door past the workbench to the staircase in the back corner. The path was thin. The footprints in it were not Elara's. They were larger. They were the prints of work boots, and they had been made recently. The edges of them had not yet softened with new dust. They were sharp, crisp. Elara's stomach turned over. She moved her eyes slowly along the path. The boot prints went to the staircase. They went up the staircase, and at the bottom of the stairs on the lowest step, sitting upright as if someone had set it there gently before going up, was a small flashlight. Black plastic, modern, brand new. She walked toward it slowly. She did not want to make a sound. She did not know why. She picked it up. It was warm, just barely. The warmth of something that had been held in a hand within the last few hours. She thumbed the switch. The beam came on, bright, strong. The batteries were fresh. Somewhere upstairs, deep in the body of the building, a floorboard creaked. Then another, then a third. The sound of weight shifting. The sound of a person somewhere above her, standing very still in the dark and listening. Elara did not move. Her hand tightened around the flashlight. The carriage house was hers. The deed was in her coat pocket. The key was in her hand. Her father had left this place to her, and only to her. And someone had been waiting inside it. Someone was waiting still. Her breath came shallow. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She lifted the flashlight beam slowly, slowly, until it rested on the top of the staircase. And in the darkness at the top of the stairs, just at the edge of the beam, where the light began to bleed away into shadow, she saw the toe of a work boot. Then it stepped back, out of sight, into the dark. Elara did not breathe. She stood at the bottom of the staircase with the flashlight beam shaking very slightly in her hand, and she did not breathe. And the silence in the carriage house stretched out the way silence stretches out when you are alone with a stranger and only one of you knows it. Her brain ran through the possibilities in the span of 3 heartbeats. A squatter. The carriage house had been empty for years, and Ashford, for all its money, and its boxwoods and its black shutters, had homeless men too. They lived in the woods behind the commuter rail station. They came out at night. One of them might have found his way down the overgrown drive and pried open a back window and made himself a home in the upstairs apartment. A teenager. Local kids might have used this place as a hideout. Cigarettes, beer, whatever else. Or one of her brothers. Dominic, checking on the property he had not been able to legally touch, looking for some piece of paperwork or some valuable thing he could quietly remove. The thought of Dominic standing at the top of those stairs in the dark made her stomach turn. She raised her chin. "I know you are up there," she said. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted it to, but it came out. "This is my property," she said. "I have the deed in my pocket. I have a key. I can call the police and have them here in 10 minutes. The last part was not exactly true. She had a flip phone with no signal in this room, and she had not yet looked up the number for the Ashford Police Department. But the man at the top of the stairs did not know that. Silence. Then a voice came down through the dark. It was a man's voice, older, steady. The voice of a person who had no intention of running. "Easy, miss," the voice said. "I am not going to hurt you. I am going to come down those stairs now. Slow. With my hands where you can see them. Do not do anything sudden." Elara did not move. A pair of work boots came into the beam of her flashlight first. Brown leather scuffed at the toes, the kind of boots that had been resoled at least twice. Then a pair of canvas work pants. Then a heavy flannel shirt over a Henley. Then a pair of hands held out at shoulder-height palms, forward fingers spread. Then the rest of him. He was tall, not towering, but tall enough that he had to duck his head a little as he came down the last 2 steps to avoid the low beam over the staircase. He was somewhere in his 60s, maybe 65. His hair was white cropped short, the kind of haircut a man gets in the same chair every 6 weeks. His face was weathered and lined and tan in the way of a man who had spent his life outdoors. His eyes were a pale gray that caught the flashlight and held it. He kept his hands up. "My name is Henry," he said. "Henry Pruitt. I run the hardware store on Main Street, Pruitt's Lumber and Supply. I have owned it for 31 years. Elara did not lower the flashlight. "What are you doing in my house?" she said. He nodded slowly, as if she had asked exactly the right question. "That is a fair thing to ask," he said. "May I lower my hands?" She hesitated, then she nodded. He lowered his hands. He kept them visible. He did not move toward her. He took one slow step away from the staircase and stood with his back against the workbench, giving her the full width of the room between them. "I was checking the roof," he said. "I do it once a month. I have been doing it once a month for 3 years. Why? Because your father asked me to. Elara's hand tightened on the flashlight. You knew my father.
I knew your father for 32 years, Henry Pruitt said. I knew him before you were born. I knew him before he ever swung a framing hammer professionally. I trained him. He paused. His pale gray eyes did not leave her face. Thomas Calloway was my apprentice, he said. He was also the closest friend I ever had in this world. The flashlight wavered. Elara's arm was getting tired. She did not let it drop. Prove it, she said. Henry Pruitt did not smile. He did not seem offended. He seemed, if anything, to approve of the question. He reached very slowly into the back pocket of his canvas pants. He pulled out a worn brown leather wallet, the corners rounded soft with years of being sat on. He flipped it open and slid a photograph out from one of the inner pockets. He held the photograph at arm's length between two fingers and stepped just close enough that she could see it without him approaching her. It was a photograph from a long time ago. The color had gone soft and reddish, the way photographs do when they sit in wallets for decades. In it, a younger Henry Pruitt, his hair still dark, was standing on a half-built porch with his arm around a thinner younger man with curly black hair and a carpenter's pencil behind his ear. They were both grinning. Sawdust was in the air around them. They were holding cans of soda. The younger man was her father. She knew his face the way you know your own. That is the porch on the house you grew up in, Henry said. 1993. Your dad bought that lot, and he and I framed that porch together in 9 days. He paid me in beer and lunches. He could not afford to pay me anything else. He had a baby on the way. He looked at her over the photograph. That baby was your older brother Dominic, he said. Marcus came 3 years later. You came 11 years after Marcus. Elara lowered the flashlight. She did not mean to. Her arm just gave out. I do not understand, she said. No, Henry said gently. You do not. Not yet. And I am not the one to make you understand. That part is not my job. He slid the photograph back into his wallet. He slid the wallet back into his pocket. Your father told me about you, he said. He told me about you for years, before you were born and after. He used to bring you into the store when you were not even tall enough to see the top of the counter. You used to ask me what every single tool on the wall was for. I do not believe I have ever met a child who asked more questions in a single afternoon than you did. He called you his spark plug. Elara's throat closed. She did not trust herself to speak. Henry looked at her, and there was something in his face she had not seen on the face of an adult in 3 years. It was patience. The patience of someone who had been waiting for her and had been waiting for a long time and was not in any hurry to rush her now that she was finally here. How did you know I was coming back? She said. Your dad told me you would, he said. He told me a girl with your stubborn streak would find her way back to anything that was hers. He told me to keep an eye on this building until you did, to make sure the roof did not cave in, to run off any teenagers who tried to break in, to leave you alone the moment you arrived, but to make sure there was a building still standing for you to arrive at. For 3 years. For 3 years, miss.
Her eyes burned. She blinked hard. She would not cry. Not yet. Not here. She forced herself to look around the dim room instead. The flashlight, she said. Mine, he said. I came in this morning to put a tarp over the soft spot in the back corner of the roof. Rain coming tonight. I wanted to get to it before you got here. I did not expect you for another day or two, frankly. Mr. Whitmore thought you might take some time to decide. She studied him. He stood with his weight balanced. His hands hung at his sides. He did not crowd her. He did not try to come closer. He waited. You said you would leave me alone the moment I arrived, she said. Yes, you have not. No. Why? Henry Pruitt considered her question for a long moment. Because I have been waiting 3 years to see you walk through that door, he said. Because your father was the best man I have ever known in my life. Because when he came to me 18 months before he died and asked me to do this thing for him, I told him yes. And a man's yes is a man's yes. And because when I heard the front door open this morning, and I knew it was you, I could not in good conscience slip out the back without at least telling you that you are not as alone as you think you are. He paused. I will leave now, he said.
If you want me to. You have my name. The store is on Main Street, 3 blocks from where the bus drops off. If you ever want to come by, you can. If you do not, that is fine too. I am not here to be in your way. He nodded once, almost formally. He took a step toward the door. Mr. Pruitt, Ilara said. He stopped. I am hungry, she said.
She had not meant to say it. The words just came out. They came out small and tired and embarrassed. And the moment they were in the air, she wanted to take them back. Henry Pruitt did not seem surprised.
There is a thermos and a wax paper bag at the top of the stairs, he said. I was going to take my lunch up there before I started on the roof. It is 2 ham sandwiches and a thermos of black coffee. The sandwiches are from the place on Elm. They make a decent rye. The coffee is from my pot at the store. It is too strong for most people. You are welcome to all of it. I will bring it down. He turned and went back up the stairs. Ilara listened to his boots on the wooden steps. They were not heavy footsteps. They moved the way the boots of a man who had spent a lifetime on construction sites move, which is to say, they knew where to set themselves, so the wood did not complain. A minute later, he came back down with a small plaid thermos and a brown paper bag.
both of which he set on the workbench. He stepped back from them.
"The bag is yours," he said. "I will go now. The flashlight you can keep. The batteries are fresh." He moved toward the door. He stopped at the threshold. He did not turn around. "Elara," he said. She had not told him her first name. "Yes."
"Your father loved you very much," Henry Pruitt said. "I do not know what is in that letter he left you. I have my guesses. But whatever is in it, you remember that he loved you. He was thinking about you every day of his sickness. He was thinking about you in the last hour I sat with him. I want you to know that." He stepped out into the daylight. The wooden door swung shut behind him on its complaining hinges. Elara stood alone in the carriage house with a flashlight in one hand and a brown paper bag of sandwiches on her father's workbench, and her ribs going up and down in a way she could not control. She made herself walk to the workbench. She made herself open the bag. The sandwiches were wrapped in butcher paper. She ate one of them standing up in 3 bites faster than she had eaten anything in months. She drank from the thermos. The coffee was too strong, exactly as he had said, and it was hot enough to scald the back of her tongue, and it was the best coffee she had ever had in her life. She ate the second sandwich more slowly. When she was done, she screwed the cap back onto the thermos. She folded the empty paper bag neatly into a square. She set them both on the workbench. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She turned, and she went up the stairs. The apartment on the second floor was small. 2 rooms, a tiny bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a galley kitchen with a wood-burning stove in one corner, and a deep porcelain sink in the other. The furniture was old and tired and pushed against the walls as if it had been waiting for someone to come back and rearrange it. A lumpy sofa upholstered in a faded floral pattern. A small kitchen table with 1 wooden chair. A metal bed frame in the back room stripped down to bare springs. A dresser with 3 drawers, one of them sticking. Everything was covered in dust. The dust was so thick on the windowsill that when she set her hand down, she left a clear print of her palm. A dead sparrow lay near the radiator. Its body was perfectly preserved, weightless, dried. The air smelled the way the downstairs had smelled. Damp earth, old wood, years and years of nobody. Elara set the flashlight on the kitchen table. She walked through the rooms slowly. She thought about the magazine Perfect Colonial at the front of the property. She thought about the BMW in the driveway and the boxwoods in their green pillows and the lion's head knocker on the red front door. She thought about this. She thought about both at once, and something in her chest cracked very quietly, like a piece of ice slipping in a glass. She walked back into the front room. She lowered herself onto the lumpy sofa. The springs underneath her shifted and groaned. A small cloud of dust rose around her and hung in the late afternoon light. She did not bother brushing it off her jeans. She put her face in her hands. She cried.
Not loudly, not in the way that scenes are cried in movies. She cried quietly. She cried into her own palms the way a person cries when they have been holding something for too long and finally have permission to put it down. Her shoulders shook. Her breath came in small, uneven hitches. The tears slid between her fingers and dropped onto the dusty floor in dark, uneven dots. She cried for her father, who had been gone for 3 years, and who had somehow, in some way she did not yet understand, sent a man named Henry Pruitt to look after this building so that she could come home to it. She cried for the little girl on his shoulders at the county fair in August of 2015, the girl who had not yet understood that she would lose him. She cried for the 15-year-old in the windowless conference room 3 years ago, hearing the words, "There is nothing left for you," spoken by her own brother, in a voice that was already practicing the future. She cried for herself, sitting on a strange sofa in a building that was hers, with $133 in her coat and an $800 tax bill due in 90 days and no plan and no clear idea of what she was supposed to do next. She cried until she ran out of crying. When she lifted her head, the windows had gone the color of new pewter. The light was leaving the room. She wiped her face with both hands. She sniffed. She sat up straighter. She put her elbow down on the floor next to the sofa to push herself up. And she heard it. Thump. Not the solid sound of an elbow hitting a wood floor. A hollow sound. The sound of an elbow hitting a drum. Alara went very still. She rapped her knuckles against the boards beneath her. Solid. She moved her hand 6 inches. Hollow. She moved her hand again. Solid. There was a section of floor, maybe 2 feet square, that did not sound like the rest of the floor. She slid off the sofa onto her knees. She ran her hand over the boards. They looked exactly like all the other boards in the room, dark with age. The gaps between them caked with the dust and grit of decades. But when she pressed down on one corner of one particular board, it gave just slightly under the pressure of her fingertips. It was loose. She dug her fingernails into the seam. She pulled. Nothing. She stood. She turned in a slow circle, looking for something, anything. In the corner of the room, leaning against the wall behind a stack of old terracotta pots, was a rusted tire iron. She did not know why a tire iron was in an upstairs apartment. She did not stop to wonder. She crossed the room. She picked it up. She brought it back to the loose board. She wedged the flat end of the iron into the seam. She put her weight on it. The wood groaned. She pushed harder. There was a sharp, dry crack, and the board came up splintering at one end. She tossed it aside. The wood was lighter than the boards around it. She realized only now that it was a different board entirely. Someone had cut a section out of the original floor and replaced it with a piece that looked the same, but was not joined the same. She got down on her stomach. She shone the flashlight into the cavity. There was a space below the floor, a hollow about the size of a microwave oven, and nestled inside it, wrapped in what looked like an old oiled canvas, was a dark green metal box. Elara did not move for several seconds. Then she reached in. The box was heavier than it looked. It was an old surplus ammunition can, the kind they sold for $15 at Army-Navy stores. The handle was rusted but solid. She lifted it out of the cavity and set it on the floor in front of her. She wiped a layer of dust off the lid. There were 2 latches, no lock. She opened them with her thumbs. The latches popped with a metallic snap that seemed in the silence of the apartment very loud. She lifted the lid. The first thing she saw was money. Not new bills. Not the crisp, clean money you got from an ATM. These were used $100 bills, soft at the edges, bound together in thick stacks with brown rubber bands. She did not count them right away. She could not, in that first moment, make her hands do the math. But there were many stacks. Many, many stacks. More money than she had ever seen in her life that was not on a television screen. Underneath the money lining the bottom of the ammo can was a thick envelope. It was made of the same heavy cream paper as the letter from Whitmore and Associates. Across the front, in her father's slightly slanting handwriting, was a single word: spark plug. Elara's eyes filled instantly. Beside the cream envelope tucked into the corner of the box was a second envelope, smaller, thicker, sealed in dark red wax with the imprint of a single capital letter: C. Calloway. Elara sat back on her heels. She lifted out 1 stack of money and set it on the floor. She did not even look at it. She lifted out another and another. She emptied the cash stack by stack onto the dusty floorboards beside her until only the 2 envelopes remained. She took out the large envelope first. The flap was tucked, not sealed. She lifted it. Inside was a thick stack of pages. Heavy paper. All of them filled edge to edge in her father's handwriting. She unfolded the first page. The handwriting was familiar in a way that made her chest hurt. It was tilted slightly to the right. The lowercase letters were small and neat. The capital letters were a little bigger than they needed to be the way she remembered them on the labels in his workshop, on the lists he used to tape to the refrigerator on the birthday cards he had given her every August for 15 years. The ink was blue. The pen had been ballpoint. He had pressed hard enough that the impression of his words could be felt on the back of each page. She began to read. My dearest Elara, my spark plug, if you are reading this, then several things have happened. She drew in a breath. The first thing it means is that you have turned 18. The second thing it means is that you are strong enough and smart enough to find your way back to this building and into this box. The third thing it means is that I am
gone. I am so sorry, sweetheart. I am more sorry than these words can carry. There is not a single day as I sit here writing this that the thought of leaving you does not cut me clean through. She stopped. She wiped her eyes. She kept reading.
I know you must have spent the last 3 years with questions in your mouth that no one was willing to answer. I know you must have spent them feeling abandoned. I know there must be a part of you somewhere that is angry with me. That part is right to be angry. I owe you the explanation. I am going to give it to you now. Elara held the pages in both hands. The light outside was nearly gone. The room had grown cold. She could see her own breath. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. She did not stop reading. She could not have stopped reading if the building had been on fire. She read until the last page. She read until there were no more pages to turn. And when she was done, she sat on the dusty floor with the letter in her lap, and her father's voice still ringing in her ears, and the weight of what he had done to her, and what he had done for her, settling into her bones like a season changing. Outside, the first rain of the evening began to fall against the slate roof above her head. The roof did not leak. Henry Pruitt had seen to that. The letter began the way her father had always begun things, simply, without apology, without decoration. The way a man who had spent his life building houses lays the first board of a floor-flat square true. My dearest Elara, my spark plug, if you are reading this, then several things have happened. She had read those words at the end of the last evening in the failing light of the upstairs apartment, with dust on her jeans and her father's handwriting shaking in her hands. She had read the entire letter once fast, the way you drink water when you have been thirsty for days, too fast to taste it, too desperate to slow down. Now it was morning. The first thin light of an October dawn was coming through the east-facing window of the apartment, the window where the ivy had not yet covered the glass. The light was the color of cold honey. It fell across the floorboards in a narrow band and touched the edge of the pages spread across Elara's lap. She had not slept. She had sat on the lumpy floral sofa all night with the letter in her hands and the sealed wax envelope on the cushion beside her, and the stacks of cash on the floor at her feet, untouched since she had lifted them out of the ammunition can. She had read the letter 3 times. She was reading it a 4th. The truth the letter said is that what happened to you was not an accident. It was a choice. It was my choice. And I made it because I loved you more than I knew how to say. Her father's handwriting filled 12 pages. He had written them over what must have been weeks, maybe months. The ink color shifted slightly from page to page, as if he had picked up different pens on different nights. In some places, the letters were steady and strong. In others, they trembled, the downstrokes wavering the lines drifting uphill on the unlined paper. She could see the progression of his illness in the handwriting itself. She could see which pages had been written on good days and which had been written on days when the morphine was doing its work, and his hands were not entirely his own. "I have loved all 3 of my children," the letter said. "I want you to hear me say that first. I loved Dominic when he was small, and he used to fall asleep on my chest. I loved Marcus when he was a boy, and he followed his brother around like a duckling. I have loved them their whole lives, and I love them still. But I was not blind, Alara. I watched your brothers grow up, and what I watched slowly over years was a kind of hunger taking shape in them. They looked at my business, at my house, at the bank accounts I had built up over decades of work, and they did not see the years of my life. They did not see the sweat. They did not see the men I had stood next to on roofs in the rain. They saw a prize. They saw something to be won. And the older they got, the more I understood that one day, whether I liked it or not, they were going to try to win it. I tried to talk to them. I tried to be a father. By the time you were 9 or 10 years old, I could see that it was not going to work. When I got my diagnosis, I knew I did not have time to fix what was broken in them. I knew I could not heal them. I could only try to protect you from them. Alara set the pages down on her lap. She looked at the window. The light had moved. It was touching the wall now, a pale rectangle climbing slowly toward the ceiling. Somewhere outside, a bird was singing. The first bird she had heard since she arrived. The rain had stopped in the night, and the morning was cool and still, and the bird did not know or care that a girl was sitting in a dusty apartment reading a letter from a dead man that was rearranging the architecture of her entire life. She picked the pages back up. If I left you a portion of the estate the normal way, Alara, your brothers would have come for it. They would have come with lawyers. They would have come with paperwork. They would have come with their charm and their patience and their willingness to wait you out. You would have been 15. You would not have had the resources to fight them. And by the time you were old enough to fight, you would have already been beaten. You would have spent the rest of your life trapped in a courtroom war with your own brothers. You would have grown up bitter. You would have grown up swimming in their poison. I could not let that happen to you. I would rather have given you a childhood of hardship that ended than a lifetime of hatred that did not. Alara closed her eyes. She had spent 3 years believing a story. The story had been so consistent and so complete that it had become the truth of her. The bone-level truth. The truth she carried into every group therapy session and every silent meal in the cafeteria of the Grayson Group home. Her father had loved her, and then her father had gotten sick. And then her father had stopped being able to protect her, and her brothers had stepped into the space where he should have been, and had decided that she was not worth keeping. The story had been wrong. The truth was that her father dying had looked at his two adult sons and seen what they were going to do, and had spent the last years of his life building a fortress around her that they could not breach. The truth was that he had let her go into the system on purpose, knowing what it would cost her, knowing what it would feel like, knowing what it would do to her trust in him, because the alternative in his judgment was worse. He had not forgotten her. He had hidden her. So I made a plan. The letter continued. It was the most difficult plan I have ever made in my life. I set up this carriage house in a separate trust. I made the trust legally untouchable. I made sure it could not be challenged by anyone, including your brothers. And I had Gerald Whitmore, an old friend whom I trust completely, build the paperwork around it like a vault. I made the building look worthless. I let the taxes go unpaid on purpose so that on paper it would seem like a debt no one in their right mind would fight over. I made sure it would be the kind of inheritance your brothers would laugh at instead of fight for. And then, sweetheart, I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I did not name you in any other part of the will. She had to stop reading. She pressed the heels of her hands against her closed eyes until she saw light behind them. She breathed in. She breathed out. She picked the pages back up. I knew the state would take you in. I knew you would go into the system. I knew you would spend years in a place no parent wants their child to go. I knew that you would in those years believe that you had been forgotten by me, by your family, by everyone. I could not bear it, but I could not see any other way. If you were not in the will, your brothers had no reason to look for you. They had no reason to track you down, no reason to pry into your life, no reason to fight you for anything. They could divide what they thought was the entire estate, and then they could forget about you. That was what I needed them to do. I needed them to forget you long enough for the trust to mature, long enough for you to turn 18, long enough for you to be old enough to receive what I had set aside without them ever knowing it existed. The cash in this box is my doing. Over the last 2 years of my life, while I was still strong enough to make trips to the bank without your brothers noticing, I quietly liquidated certain assets that were in my name alone. Old savings bonds, a small life insurance policy that had matured, some money from the sale of a piece of land in Litchfield County that almost no one knew I owned. I converted it all to cash. I brought the cash here. I sealed it under this floor. The money in this box is clean. It is untraceable. It is yours. It is enough to pay the taxes on this property and to live on modestly for at least a year. It is enough to give you a foothold. But Elara, the money is not the real inheritance. The real inheritance is the other envelope.
Alara's eyes drifted to the smaller envelope on the cushion beside her. The dark red wax, the capital C pressed into it with her father's signet. She did not pick it up. Not yet. The letter continued. The smaller envelope contains a different kind of gift, a heavier one. It contains the truth about what your brothers have done. For the last 2 years of my life, while they were running my business, they were also stealing from it. They set up shell corporations. They created false vendors. They funneled invoices through accounts they controlled and then back into their own pockets. They told me the company was struggling. They told me my medical bills were burning through our reserves. They told me to sign documents that they said would streamline the company's finances and ease the burden on them as caregivers. They told me to sign documents that gave them more and more control. And in my last 2 years, in the fog of pain medication and chemotherapy, and the weakness of a dying man, I signed them. But I was not as far gone as they believed, Alara. I was foggy. I was tired. But I was still your father. And I still knew what a forged invoice looked like. I started keeping copies. I started keeping a ledger. I had a nurse who helped me, a woman named Ruth, whom you would not remember because your brothers made sure you did not see me very much in those last 6 months. Ruth took my notes when my hands shook too badly to write. Ruth made the copies. Ruth hid the documents for me one at a time until I had enough. In the smaller envelope sealed with my mark, you will find everything. Wire transfer records, photocopies of fake invoices, the names of every shell corporation they used, the names of every offshore account they routed money into. A handwritten ledger signed and dated by me that catalogs every dollar I could trace. There is enough evidence in that envelope to send your brothers to federal prison for a very long time. There is enough evidence to claw back through the courts every dollar of my company and my estate. So this, my darling girl, is the second part of what I have left you. A choice. You can take the cash from this box. You can walk away from Ashford. You can use the money to find a small apartment somewhere. You can put yourself through community college. You can become whatever you want to become. You can let your brothers keep what they took. And you can live the rest of your life on your own terms, in your own quiet, with your own peace. There is no shame in that path. None. You have already earned more peace than peace owes you. Or you can take the smaller envelope. You can drive it to the office of the United States Attorney for the District of Connecticut. You can put it on the desk of an honest prosecutor. You can take back what is rightfully yours. You can sit in courtrooms. You can give depositions. You can have your face in the local newspapers. You can have justice. But Alara, I have to be honest with you. That second path is a war. It will be years. It will be lawyers and depositions and accusations and headlines. It will pull you back into your brother's world, and it will hold you there, and it will define you. I do not know if you will come out of it whole. I do not know if anyone does. I do not know which path is right. I only know that this choice belongs to you, not to me, not to anyone else, to you. One path is peace, the other is justice.
You choose Sparkplug. And whatever you choose, I want you to know with everything I am that I am proud of you, that I have always been proud of you, that the years I had with you were the brightest years of my life, that you were and you remain the best thing I ever built. Your father always, Thomas Calloway. Elara put the last page down. The room had grown warmer. The sun was higher now. The band of light on the wall had climbed to the ceiling and was beginning to cross it. She pressed both her hands flat against her face. She did not cry this time. She had cried herself out the night before. What came now was something quieter, something deeper. It was the sound of a story she had carried for 3 years, setting itself down on the floor in front of her and stepping aside. And the sound of another story, the real one, standing up to take its place. She sat with that feeling for a long time. Then she put the pages of the letter back together in order. She folded them carefully. She set them gently on top of the ammunition can. She picked up the smaller envelope. The wax seal was the deep red of old wine. The C in the wax was clean, sharp, perfectly formed. Her father had pressed that seal himself, probably with the brass signet he had kept in the top drawer of his workshop desk. She held the envelope in both hands. She did not break the seal. She thought about a courtroom, years of it. Lawyers in shiny shoes, reporters with cameras, her face on the local news, her name on the front page of the Ashford Gazette. The whole town watching her become the central character in the Calloway family's destruction. She thought about peace. She thought about a small apartment somewhere far from here, a community college, a quiet life, a life in which she never heard the name Dominic Calloway again. She thought about her father's hands, the calluses, the strength, the carpenter's pencil always behind his ear. She did not have an answer. Not yet. She set the envelope down on the cushion beside her. She did not break the seal. That decision could wait until morning, except it was already morning. Sometime around 4 in the night, she had gotten up and lit the wood-burning stove with kindling she found in a brass scuttle beside it. The kindling had been split recently. The splits were clean. The wood smelled fresh. Henry Pruitt again. She had fed 3 small logs into the stove. The fire had taken. The heat had pushed back slowly against the cold of the apartment. She had stood with her palms toward the iron belly of the stove, and she had watched the fire move behind the grate, and she had thought about the envelope. She had thought about Dominic. She had thought about Marcus. She had thought about the kitchen lights of the Colonial, the two silhouettes she had seen through the bare branches of the maple trees the evening before. Dominic gesturing with one hand, Marcus nodding, the way Marcus had always nodded, even as a boy. Garrett had been no. Marcus. Marcus had been the lieutenant. Marcus had been the one who agreed. She had wondered if Marcus knew all the way down to his bones what they had done. She had wondered if he ever woke up at 3 a.m. and lay in the dark and felt the weight of their father's name pressing on his chest. She had wondered, but only for a second. Wondering about Marcus was a soft road. She did not let herself walk far down it. Now, at 5:30, the sky began to turn the color of old pearl. At 6:40, Alara put on her coat, buttoned it to the throat, slid the wax-sealed envelope into her inside coat pocket, and walked out the front door of the carriage house. She did not have a clear plan. She had a direction. Main Street was a 40-minute walk in the wet morning. She walked it. The town was waking up around her as she came in past the war memorial, past the white-painted gazebo, past the old stone library where she had read her first chapter book. The bakery on the corner had its lights on. 2 early customers stood at the counter waiting for coffee. A man in a wool coat was scraping frost off the windshield of a pickup truck. The smell of fresh bread cut across the wet pavement and into the cold air, and her stomach reminded her that she had not eaten since Henry's sandwiches. She kept walking. Pruitt's Lumber and Supply sat at the far end of Main Street where the commercial buildings began to give way to the residential. It was an old brick building, 2 stories with a green-painted wooden sign that hung from a wrought iron arm above the door. The lettering on the sign was hand-carved. The lights were on. She pushed the door open. A bell rang somewhere overhead. A small, clear sound, the kind that has been ringing in the same place above the same door for 40 years. The store smelled like sawdust and machine oil and old paper. Wooden shelves ran from floor to ceiling, stacked with hardware in cardboard bins. Boxes of nails sorted by size, coils of rope, cans of paint, drawer pulls, brass hinges, hand planes lined up like soldiers on a high shelf. Everything was where it had been put. Nothing was where a chain hardware store would have put it. Henry Pruitt was standing behind the counter at the back, pouring coffee from a glass carafe into a brown ceramic mug. He looked up when the bell rang. He saw her. He did not show surprise. He did not show satisfaction. He did not, in the way of a lot of men his age, perform anything at all. He simply set down the carafe, reached under the counter, took out a second ceramic mug, set it on the counter, and poured. He slid the mug toward the stool on her side. "Sit," he said. Alara sat. She set the leather notebook from her father's workbench on the counter between them. She wrapped her cold hands around the coffee mug. The heat moved into her palms. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. "Henry, please." "Henry." She did not know how to start.
so she did not start. She drank the coffee. It was again too strong, and it was again exactly the right thing. He did not press her. He stood on his side of the counter and drank from his own mug and waited the way he had waited the day before, with patience, with stillness. After a long minute, she reached inside her coat and took out the sealed envelope and set it on the counter beside the notebook. The red wax C caught the light. Henry looked at the envelope. He did not touch it. "Is that what I think it is?" he said. "Did he tell you what was in it?" "No," Henry said. "He told me there would be a sealed envelope. He told me you would have to decide what to do with it. He told me if I ever saw it in your hand to remember that the decision was not mine, and the advice was not mine, and the burden was not mine." He paused. "He also told me," Henry said, "that if you ever asked me what I thought, I should tell you the truth, and that the truth was a man's to give freely." Elara looked at him. "What do you think, Henry?" Henry Pruitt set down his coffee. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the envelope. He looked at the notebook. He looked finally at her. "I think," he said slowly, "that justice and revenge live close enough to each other that an honest man can mistake one for the other in poor light. I think your father did not want you mistaking them. I think he laid out two paths for you because he knew both paths have a cost, and he did not want to choose which cost you paid." He breathed. "I think he said that whatever you decide today, you should not decide it because someone hurt you. You should decide it because of who you want to be in 20 years. Elara looked down at the envelope. She thought about who she wanted to be in 20 years. She did not in that moment know, but she could feel with a strange clarity who she did not want to be. She did not want to be a woman in a courtroom. She did not want to be a woman who had spent her 20s giving depositions about her dead father's medical records. She did not want to be a woman whose name lived next to her brother's names on the front page of the Ashford Gazette. She also did not want to be a woman who burned the truth because the truth was inconvenient to carry. She did not want to set the envelope on fire in the wood stove and watch it curl and pretend that what her brothers had done was less than what they had done. She wanted both things and neither thing. She sat with the envelope for a long minute. Then she lifted her head. "Henry," she said. "Where does Gerald Whitmore keep his office?" Henry's pale gray eyes held hers. 3 blocks east," he said. "Above the old savings bank. 2nd floor. Buzzer says Whitmore and Associates. He gets in around 8. She nodded. She slid the envelope back into her coat. She finished her coffee in 2 long swallows. "Thank you for the roof," she said. Henry Pruitt looked at her, and something moved at the corner of his mouth that was almost a smile, and was not quite. "Your father," he said, "would be sitting on this stool right now if he could. I want you to know that." "I know," Elara said.
She got off the stool. Gerald Whitmore's office smelled like furniture polish and old books. The carpet was deep green. The walls were lined with framed black and white photographs of Ashford in its earlier centuries. White steepled churches and horse-drawn carts, and a hand-lettered sign for the Ashford Savings Bank in 1894. The man behind the desk was in his late 60s. He had a full head of silver hair, combed back from a high forehead. He wore a charcoal suit and a navy tie. His hands folded on the desk in front of him were heavily veined and very still. He had risen when she walked in. He had said her name without needing to ask. He had offered her coffee. She had declined. He had sat back down across from her with the calm of a man who had been waiting 3 years for this conversation and was not going to rush it now that it had arrived. Elara set the sealed envelope on his desk between them. She did not open it. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Robert, please." "Gerald." He corrected himself, and something like amusement flickered across his face. "Forgive me." "Gerald. Gerald." She took a breath. "I am not going to take this to the United States Attorney's office," she said. "I am not going to turn my brothers in." Gerald Whitmore did not react. His face stayed exactly as it had been. "I see," he said. "I am also not going to destroy it," she said. He nodded slowly. "I am going to leave it here," she said. "With you, in a sealed safe. I want it kept somewhere with my name on it. I want it kept somewhere they cannot reach. I do not want it opened." She paused. "Unless they come for me." Gerald Whitmore was quiet for a long beat. "Define come for you," he said. "If they ever set foot on my property without my permission," Elara said. "If they ever threaten me. If they ever try to take the carriage house from me through any legal action real or invented. If they ever harass me. If they ever in any way decide that the place I am rebuilding for myself is something they can put their hands on." She tapped the envelope with one finger. "If any of those things happen," she said, "I want you to walk this envelope to the office of the United States Attorney for the District of Connecticut the same day. I want you to put it on a desk. I want you to give them my father's ledger and his copies and his nurse's name. And I want you to let the federal government do what federal governments do." She drew a breath. "But until that happens," she said, "I want this envelope to sit in your safe, and I want it to sit there for the rest of my life if that is what peace requires. I want my brothers to keep what they have. I want them to live in that house. I want them to drive their cars and run what is left of my father's company and grow old and look at themselves in the mirror every morning. I want them to do that. I do not want their punishment." She lifted her eyes to his. "I want their distance," she said. Gerald Whitmore watched her for a long moment. He did not speak right away. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, and steadier, the way the voice of an older man gets when he is choosing his words to honor something. That is a more thoughtful answer than I expected, he said. It is in some ways a more difficult answer than either of the two your father laid out for you. I know, Elara said.
Your father, Gerald Whitmore said slowly, told me a story once, a year or so before he died. He told me that the night you were born, he had been working a kitchen renovation in Avon, and he had gotten the call from your mother 3 hours into a long pour of concrete. He told me he set down his trowel and he drove 90 miles an hour up Route 44 in the rain. And when he got to the hospital, he was still wearing his work boots and there was still wet mortar on his hands. And he held you for the first time with mortar on his hands. Oh. He paused. He said, Gerald Whitmore said that he knew right then that whatever you grew up to be, you were going to be the kind of person who built things instead of breaking them. He said he could feel it in your weight. He said he did not know how he knew. He just knew. Elara's eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall. She blinked them back. He was right, Gerald Whitmore said. He was usually right. He reached for the envelope. He did not break the seal. He lifted it carefully and turned and crossed to the wall behind his desk, where a heavy oil painting of a covered bridge had been hung at chest height. He swung the painting away from the wall on a hidden hinge. Behind it was an old black safe with a brass dial. He spun the dial in a series of practiced quarter turns. The handle clicked. He swung the safe door open. He set the envelope inside on the top shelf. Alone. He closed the door. He spun the dial twice for good measure. He swung the painting back over the safe. He turned around. It is in there, he said. It will stay in there. I will put a note in my will that in the event of my death, the senior partner of this firm is to maintain the envelope in this safe under the same conditions. The envelope is not in my office. The envelope is in your name, in trust, and it lives here until you tell me otherwise, or until the conditions you have given me are met. Gerald paused. There is one more thing you should know, he said. Your father prepaid a retainer with this firm. 5 years of legal representation fully funded in your name. If your brothers ever challenge you in court through the county through any mechanism at all, you already have counsel. You already have defense. He built that too. Elara stared at him. 5 years. 5 years, Elara. Your father was a deliberate man. She sat with that for a moment. The room was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Through the window, she could see the rooftops of Ashford in the morning light, the white steeples, the bare trees, the distant ridge of hills going red and gold. Her father had planned for everything. He had planned for the carriage house. He had planned for the money. He had planned for the envelope. And he had planned for the war that might come after. He had built the fortress, and then he had built the army to defend it. And then he had stepped into death and trusted that his daughter would know what to do with both. Thank you, Gerald, she said.
If at any point in your life you change your mind, he said, you may come back. You may take it to the federal authorities. You may destroy it. You may do anything you wish with it. It is yours. I understand. She stood up. He stood up. He came around the desk. He did not offer his hand. He looked at her for a long moment instead. Then he said very simply, "Your father would have been proud of you this morning." Elara carried those words out of the office and down the stairs and into the cold October air. She walked the 3 blocks to the county clerk's office with the sun on her face. She paid $800 in back taxes in worn hundreds out of her coat pocket. The woman behind the counter, a thick-armed clerk in her 50s named Marjorie according to her nameplate, took the cash without expression, counted it twice, stamped the receipt in 3 places, slid it under the glass. The carriage house was now hers, free and clear, tax current. She folded the receipt and put it in her coat pocket. She stood on the sidewalk outside the county building for a long moment with her face tilted up toward the sun. Then she walked back to Pruitt's Lumber and Supply, and she told Henry Pruitt that she was ready to learn how to fix a roof. The roof came first. Henry would not let her go up until she had learned on the safety of the ground how to walk a pitched slope, how to set her weight, how to never under any circumstances take a step backward. He made her practice on a mock-up he had built in his back lot 20 years ago for exactly this kind of teaching. A wooden frame covered in old shingles set at the same pitch as a standard New England slate roof. He stood on the ground beside her, with his arms crossed and his pale eyes narrow, and he made her do it again and again until she could move on the slope without thinking about her feet. Then they went up onto the roof of the carriage house. It was a cold morning in early November. Henry brought a thermos of coffee and a bag of cinnamon rolls from the bakery on the corner. And they sat on the ridge of the slate roof with their boots braced and drank coffee and looked out over Ashford. From up there, Elara could see the back of the Colonial. She could see down into Dominic's yard. She could see the patio furniture on the back deck, the gas grill under its black cover, 2 empty wine glasses still on the patio table from the night before. Henry saw her looking. He did not say anything. After a long minute, Elara turned her back to the Colonial and faced the other way. "Show me the soft spot," she said. He did. They worked the roof for 3 full weekends. They pulled out the rotted slates. They cut new ones from a pallet Henry brought over in his pickup truck salvaged slate from an old church in Hartford that had been torn down the year before. The slates were 140 years old. They matched the rest of the roof exactly. Henry showed her how to lay them so the seams broke in the proper pattern, the way the original slater had done it in 1899. He taught her the slater's hammer. He taught her how to punch a nail hole without cracking the stone. He taught her how to set a slate so it sat flat against its neighbors, the weight bearing on the slate below it and not on the nail. The nail, he said, is not what holds the roof up.
The nail is what keeps the slate from sliding. The roof is held up by gravity and by the patience of the man who said it.
She listened. She tried. She broke 3 slates on her first morning before she got the angle right. Henry did not raise his voice. He did not sigh. He did not the way a man with less patience might have taken the hammer out of her hand and do it for her. He simply waited until she figured out what she had done wrong. And then he nodded once. And then he handed her another slate. By the end of the 3rd weekend, the roof was sound. It was sound in a way it had not been sound in decades. Henry stood on the ground with his hands on his hips and looked up at it. "That roof will outlive me," he said. "It might outlive you." Elara wiped her forehead with the back of her arm. "Good," she said. And then the county came. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-November. Elara was on a ladder against the south wall of the carriage house, repointing the brick along the foundation line. The mortar was cold in the trowel. Her breath came out in clouds. She heard the crunch of gravel in the drive and looked up and saw a white county truck with the Harlan County seal on the door, pulling to a stop behind her. A man in a khaki jacket climbed out. He had a clipboard and a badge on a lanyard, and the particular expression of a person who has been asked to deliver news that is not his fault, but is nevertheless going to ruin someone's day. "Ms. Calloway," he said. "Yes. My name is David Ennis. I am with the Harlan County Building Inspector's office. We have received a complaint regarding the structure." Elara came down the ladder, one rung at a time. She did not hurry. She wiped her hands on her work pants. "What kind of complaint?" she said. "The complaint alleges that this building is being occupied as a dwelling without proper permits and without meeting residential safety codes. I am required to conduct an inspection." Elara's stomach dropped, but her face did not change. She had learned in the group homes that the face you show a person with a clipboard is the face they use to decide how much trouble you are worth. She showed him a very calm face. "Who filed the complaint?" she said. "The complaint was filed anonymously," he said. He did not look comfortable saying it. Of course it was, Elara thought. She thought of Dominic. She thought of the photographs he had tried to take on his visit. She thought of the BMW pulling out of the gravel drive in December. She thought of the kind of man who would not fight you face to face, but would use a county form to do it for him. She did not say any of this. She said, "Come in. I will show you everything." The inspection took 2 hours. David Ennis walked through every room with his clipboard and his flashlight and his tape measure. He checked the electrical panel original knob and tube wiring in some sections which he flagged. He checked the plumbing. He checked the stove for proper ventilation. He checked the stairs for code-compliant handrails. He checked the windows for egress. When he was done, he stood in the workshop with his clipboard and his pen, and he told her the truth, which was that the building, while structurally sound, did not meet current residential code in several areas. The electrical needed to be updated.
The staircase needed a handrail. The bathroom needed ventilation. 2 of the windows did not meet minimum egress requirements.
She had 60 days to bring the building into compliance. If she did not, the county would issue a vacate order, and she would have to leave. 60 days, he said. He tore a yellow copy from his clipboard and handed it to her. She took it. She did not let her hand shake. She thanked him. She watched him drive away. Then she stood in the workshop alone, and she looked at the yellow paper in her hand, and she felt the anger come up through her chest like something with teeth. Dominic had done this. She could not prove it, but she knew. The way you know when you have been raised by a wolf exactly which direction the next attack will come from. She called Gerald Whitmore from the flip phone outside the carriage house where the signal was strongest, which was still not very strong. Gerald listened. Gerald asked questions. Gerald took notes. "I will handle the legal side," he said. "You handle the building. 60 days is tight, but it is not impossible. How much of it can you do yourself?" "Most of it," Elara said. She did not know if that was true. She said it anyway. She walked to Pruitt's Lumber and Supply. She showed Henry the yellow paper. He read it slowly. He set it down on the counter. He looked at her over his reading glasses. "All right then, Elara," he said. "We have work to do." They worked. They worked through November and into December. 14-hour days. Henry brought in an electrician. He trusted a man named Charlie Phelps, who had wired half the houses in Ashford County and who owed Henry a favor from 15 years back. Charlie looked at the knob and tube wiring and shook his head and said he could have it updated in 2 weekends if someone would pull the old wire for him. Elara pulled the old wire. She learned how to fish new Romex through walls that were 120 years old without tearing out the plaster. She built the staircase handrail herself. White oak, mortise and tenon. Henry watched her measure and cut and fit it, and he did not help her unless she asked, and she did not ask often. She replaced the 2 undersized windows with proper egress units that Henry sourced from a builder who was demolishing a Victorian in Litchfield. The windows were old, but they were the right size, and they had their original hardware, and when she set them into the openings she had framed, they looked like they had always been there. Gerald Whitmore handled the county. He filed the proper permits. He responded to the complaint with a letter that was in Gerald's quiet way, a masterpiece of legal precision. The letter did not mention Dominic. It did not mention the anonymous complaint. It simply stated that Miss Calloway was in full compliance with all county requirements and that any further interference with her lawful occupation of her own property would be met with appropriate legal action. The county inspector came back on the 52nd day, 8 days before the deadline. He walked through the building again with his clipboard and his flashlight and his tape measure. When he was done, he stood in the workshop and he looked around, and something in his face changed. He had expected Elara realized to come back and find the building in the same condition. He had expected to issue the vacate order. He had expected the girl to fail. "Everything checks out," he said. He sounded surprised. He stamped the yellow paper. He handed her the green copy. Compliant. Ilara held the green paper in her hands. She did not smile. She folded it carefully and put it in the drawer of her father's workbench next to the leather notebook. Then she went outside and she finished the repointing on the south wall.
And then 3 weeks later, on a cold afternoon in December, the gravel crunched in the drive again. And this time, it was not the county. It was Dominic. He was standing 10 feet away in a dark cashmere overcoat and polished leather shoes that were entirely inappropriate for the gravel drive. He looked in that moment exactly like a man who had paid a tailor a great deal of money to make him look like the kind of man who never came down driveways like this one. He was 32 years old. He had their father's eyes. He had nothing else of him. Ilara was on a ladder against the south wall. She had been screwing in the last bracket of a new gutter she had hung that morning. She did not come down right away. She set the screwdriver into the loop of her tool belt. She came down the ladder one rung at a time, on purpose. She made him wait. When she stepped off the bottom rung, she turned around. "Ilara," he said. "Dominic." He looked her up and down. He took in the canvas work pants, the flannel shirt, the tool belt, the smear of mortar dust on her cheek. His mouth tightened in a way she remembered. "You have been here," he said. "For how long?" 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He looked past her at the carriage house, at the new flashing on the roof line, at the repointed brick along the south wall, at the cleared garden where the summer's weeds had been pulled out and the soil turned for spring.
She saw him doing the math. She saw him calculating in real time what this building was now going to be worth on the open market. The square footage, the lot, the carriage house charm of it, the Ashford zip code. She saw on his face the moment he stopped seeing a building and started seeing a number. "Listen," he said, "I owe you an apology." "No," Ilara said. "Excuse me."
"You do not owe me an apology, Dominic. You owe me a lot of things. An apology is not one of them. Apologies are for people who are going to behave differently afterward." He blinked. The blink told her everything she needed to know. He had not expected her to talk to him like an adult. He had expected to find a frightened girl. He had probably rehearsed an entire conversation in his car on the way over. A conversation in which she nodded and cried and let him be the grown-up. "Ilara," he said, slower now, recalibrating. "I want to make you an offer. This building is in poor shape. I know you have been doing some work on it. That is admirable, but the underlying structure is over 120 years old. The plumbing is not up to code. The electrical is original. You are going to be sinking money into it for the rest of your life." He paused.
"I am prepared to offer you $15,000 for it. A check. Today. We will draw up a quitclaim deed and a general release. You sign over the property. You sign a standard release of any further claims against the estate. and you walk away with cash in your pocket. You are 18 years old, Ilara. $15,000 is more than a lot of girls your age have. You could go to college. You could go anywhere. He stopped. He waited.
Elara looked at him. She let the silence stretch out. She let him hear it. "Dominic," she said finally, "how long have you known about the codicil?" He did not answer right away. She watched him decide whether to lie. He chose not to. "2 years," he said, "maybe a little longer, and you have spent 2 years trying to find a way to break the trust." He did not answer that either. He did not need to. "Gerald Whitmore built it well," she said. His jaw flexed. "Elara," he said, "I am trying to help you." "No," Elara said. "You are trying to help yourself." "There is a difference, Dominic. Our father knew the difference. He was very good at the difference. You did not inherit that from him. You inherited his eyes. That is all." Dominic's face changed. It changed the way an expensive piece of glass changes when you tap it just slightly the wrong way. The civility came off it. What was underneath had been underneath the whole time. "You are 18 years old," he said. "You have no idea what you are sitting on. You have no idea what this property is worth. You have no idea what is going to happen to it the moment the town reassesses, the moment some inspector comes out here, the moment someone decides this lot needs to be brought into the 21st century. You are going to lose this place, Elara. You are going to lose it to bureaucracy and ignorance and your own arrogance. And when you do, you are going to wish you had taken my check." She let him finish. She did not look away. When he was done, she said very quietly, "Our father built that porch on the Colonial with his own 2 hands. He laid the brick on the front walk himself. He hung the beam over the front door. He carved his initials into the back of it where no one would ever see them." She paused. "You do not understand the value of this building," she said, "because you have never built anything in your life. You do not understand what our father did because you never picked up a tool. You looked at his company and you saw a balance sheet. You looked at this property and you saw a market price. You looked at me and you saw an inconvenience. That is what is wrong with you, Dominic. It has always been what is wrong with you. And our father saw it. He saw it years before he died." His face went very still. "Our father loved me," he said. "Yes," Elara said, "he did, and it broke his heart that you became this. Now you can go." He did not move. "Dominic." She tilted her head just slightly toward the drive. "Off my property," she said. "Please." He stared at her. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, but he did not. He turned slowly with the dignity of a man trying very hard
to leave a room the way a king would leave a room, and not the way a child would leave a room. And he walked back up the gravel drive in his ruined leather shoes. Elara did not move until she heard the BMW start. She did not move until the gravel crunched under its tires and the sound of the engine receded down Oak Haven Lane. Then she went into the carriage house and put both her hands flat on her father's workbench, and she let herself shake for 90 seconds. Then she stopped shaking. She checked the workbench. The leather notebook was still there, but the dust on its cover had been disturbed. There were smudges that had not been there before. Finger marks. Someone had picked it up. Someone had looked at it. Dominic had not only come to make an offer, he had come to look for something. He did not know what her father had left in this building, but he suspected, and he had been searching. Elara picked up the notebook. She held it against her chest the way she had held it the first day. She looked around the workshop, at the pegboard of tools, at the old horse stalls, at the workbench her father had stood behind for 30 years. She went outside. She finished the work on the south wall. The next morning, she walked to Gerald Whitmore's office and told him everything. He took notes in his careful handwriting with his fountain pen. He asked her if she wished to revise the instructions on the envelope. She thought about it. She thought about Dominic's face when he had said, "Our father loved me." "No," she said. "Same instructions. The envelope stays in the safe." He came here. He did not threaten me directly. He made an offer, and he left when I asked him to. That is not enough to open the envelope. But Gerald... Yes, he was looking for something. He touched things on the workbench. He was searching. I think he suspects our father left documents here. Gerald Whitmore nodded slowly. "I will draft a letter," he said. "A formal notice. It will not mention the envelope. It will not mention any documents. It will simply inform your brothers that any further unauthorized entry onto your property, any further contact that you have not invited, and any further use of county mechanisms to harass or displace you will result in legal consequences that have already been prepared and that are, as the letter will say, fully funded." He looked at her over his reading glasses. "Your brothers are not stupid, Elara," he said. "They will read between the lines. They will understand that something is waiting for them if they push too hard. They will not know what it is, but they will know it is there. And that, in my experience, is usually enough." The letter was sent by certified mail. It arrived at 412 Oak Haven Lane on a Thursday afternoon. Elara did not see Dominic receive it. She did not need to. She did not hear from Dominic again. She did not hear from Marcus. The gravel drive stayed empty. The green copy of the building inspection stayed in her father's workbench drawer. The yellow paper, the original complaint, the anonymous one, the one filed by a man who did not have the courage to put his name on it, she kept that too. She folded it and placed it inside the leather notebook next to her father's handwriting. Measure twice, cut once, sometimes measure 3,
sometimes 4. There is no shame in being sure.
She closed the notebook. She put it back on the workbench. She went outside into the December cold, and she stood on the step of the carriage house, and she looked at the sky, which was the color of iron, and she breathed in air that smelled like wood smoke and cold stone and the first suggestion of snow. The carriage house stood behind her. The roof was sound. The walls were pointed. The windows were glazed. The electrical was new. The staircase had a handrail. The county had signed off. The brothers had been warned. And in a safe 3 blocks east behind an oil painting of a covered bridge, an envelope sat on a shelf in the dark, sealed in red wax, waiting for a day that Elara Calloway hoped with every bone in her body would never come.
The winter came, the way winter comes to small Connecticut towns, not all at once, but in slow, steady degrees, the way a man lowers himself into cold water. First the frost on the windshields in the morning, then the ice on the puddles in the gravel drive. Then the first snow which fell on a Tuesday night in early January and covered the slate roof of the carriage house in a thin white sheet that Elara watched from the upstairs window for a long time before she went to bed.
The roof held. Of course it held. She and Henry had set those slates themselves, and the slates were 140 years old, and they had been holding snow since before anyone alive could remember. She checked anyway. She checked because her father would have checked. She checked because checking was what builders did. In the mornings, she woke before dawn. She lit the wood-burning stove with kindling. She now split herself out behind the carriage house on a stump Henry had brought over in his truck and set into the ground without being asked. The kindling caught. The fire grew. The apartment filled with the smell of cedar smoke, and the warmth pushed back against the January cold, and Elara stood at the stove with her palms toward the iron belly and watched the fire move behind the grate. She had a routine now. She had not had a routine in 3 years. In the group homes, routine was something imposed on you by other people. Meal times and therapy sessions and lights out and the endless dull rhythm of someone else's schedule pressed down on top of your life like a lid on a jar. This routine was hers. She had built it the way she was building everything else. One piece at a time. At 5:30, she split kindling. At 6, she made coffee in the deep porcelain sink, using a stovetop percolator Henry had given her from a shelf in the back of his store. At 6:15, she ate whatever she had bread from the bakery, eggs from the farm stand on Route 12, sometimes an apple from Mrs. Langford's tree across the lane. At 6:30, she walked to the Ashford Public Library. Jean Alcott had hired her in February. Jean was in her mid-60s, a tall woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the particular kind of patience that comes from spending 40 years in the company of books. She had known Thomas Calloway from the Historical Society. She had known him the way most people in Ashford had known him as the man who showed up when things needed building, and who never sent a bill to anyone who could not afford to pay one.
"You look like your father around the eyes," Jean had said on Elara's first day. He used to come in here on Saturday mornings and read the woodworking journals in the reference section. He always put them back exactly where he found them. The library smelled like old paper and floor wax and the faint sweetness of the adhesive they used to repair damaged spines. The work was quiet. The pay was small but reliable. Elara shelved books and helped patrons find things and read in the slow stretches between visitors every book she had ever wanted to read in the group home but had not been allowed to keep. The cash from the ammunition can sat untouched in a coffee tin under her father's workbench. She did not draw from it for groceries. She did not draw from it for anything except materials for the carriage house. The library paid for her food. Henry sold her materials at his cost, and once or twice when she protested at less than his cost. She stopped protesting when she understood that the protest was hurting his feelings. There were things she was learning that a man like Henry Pruitt needed to give. Taking them with grace was its own kind of work. In January, on a cold evening just before closing time, Mrs. Langford walked down the gravel drive in a wool coat with a casserole dish in her hands and knocked on the door of the carriage house. Elara answered with sawdust in her hair. "You have been working hard, dear," Mrs. Langford said. "I figured you could use a hot dinner." It was chicken and rice with mushrooms. It smelled like a home. Elara did not know how to say thank you in a way that would carry the weight of what she meant. So she said it small. She said it twice. She said it the way you say something when your throat is full and you are afraid that if you open it any wider, the rest of you will come pouring out. Mrs. Langford patted her on the arm. "You look like your father around the eyes," she said. "I knew him a little. He used to plow my drive in the bad winters when I was widowed. He never let me pay him. If you ever need anything, you come across the lane anytime." She turned and walked back up the gravel. Elara ate the casserole at her father's old kitchen table alone by the light of a single bulb, and it was the best meal she had eaten in 3 years. Not because of the cooking, though the cooking was good. Because of what it meant. It meant that someone had thought about her. It meant that someone had stood in their own kitchen and spent an hour making something warm, and had carried it through the cold, and had knocked on her door, and had handed it to her without wanting anything in return. She washed the dish. She walked it back across the lane the next morning and set it on Mrs. Langford's porch with a note written on a scrap of brown paper in her father's style. Small, neat letters, capitals, just slightly too large. "Thank you. That meant everything to me. Elara." In March, the cabinetry began. It started on a cold Saturday morning when Elara walked into Pruitt's Lumber and Supply with a question about the depth of a kitchen counter, and walked out 3 hours later with a hand plane and a length of hickory and a promise. "If you want kitchen cabinets," Henry had said, "you can have store-bought cabinets. They come in a flat box. They take a weekend. They will hold your plates." He had paused. Or he had said, "You can have your father's cabinets, mortise and tenon. Hand-fitted, built for 100 years. But you have to build them yourself. I will show you. But I will not do them for you." They have to be yours. She had thought about it for half a second. Show me, she had said. That afternoon, they stood in the back lot of the store where Henry kept a wood pile under a corrugated metal roof. And he walked her through the lumber the way another man might have walked a child through a museum. He showed her oak and ash and maple and cherry. He showed her how to read a board, how to see the way the grain ran, how to predict where it would split and where it would hold. He showed her a beam of hickory that had come out of a barn in Litchfield County when the barn had been taken down 20 years ago. A beam that had been waiting in his back lot under that metal roof for the right project. This is yours if you want it, Henry said. Your dad and I pulled this beam out of that barn in 2005. He helped me load it onto my truck. He said one day someone would build something out of it. He did not say who. Elara ran her hand along the beam. The grain was the color of dark honey. The surface was rough with age. Under the rough was something else. Something deeper. The long, slow density of wood that had grown for 150 years on a Connecticut hillside before someone had cut it down and squared it into a barn beam. I will take it, she said. They cut the beam into rough cabinet stock that afternoon. They planed the boards down over the next 3 weekends. Henry taught her how to read a square. He taught her how to mark a board for a mortise. He taught her how to chisel out the waste slowly in thin shaves without splitting the wood. He taught her how to cut a tenon to fit a mortise so tightly that the joint did not need glue. Only friction. Only the patience of 2 pieces of wood that had been shaped to meet each other exactly. The nail is not what holds the roof up, he had told her on the rooftop in November. Now in the workshop, he told her the other half. And the glue is not what holds the cabinet together. The joint is what holds it. The joint is 2 pieces of wood that were made for each other. Everything else is insurance. She made her first joint on a Tuesday evening in late March. Alone, after her library shift, in the carriage house with the wood stove going and the windows dark, and the only light coming from the single bulb above her father's workbench. She fit the tenon into the mortise. It went in stiff. It held. She tapped it apart with a wooden mallet. She fit it back together. She tapped it apart again. She did this 5 times before she went to bed. In the morning, she brought it to Henry. He looked at the joint for a long moment. He turned it over in his hands. He held it up to the light. He nodded once. That is yours, Elara, he said. Nobody else's, forever. She did not know in that moment why those words made her eyes fill. She figured it out later. She figured it out after she had built the whole bank of cabinets and hung them one at a time on the wall above her father's deep porcelain sink. She figured it out the first time she opened a cabinet door 3 months after that first joint, and saw the inside of it, the hickory grain running clean through the back panel, and realized that no one would ever look at the inside of that cabinet but her, and that her father had built every cabinet in the Colonial the same way. and that she finally understood what he had been doing all those years. He had not been building cabinets. He had been building things that would outlast him. Things that were beautiful on the inside, where no one would see because the beauty was not for anyone else. The beauty was the point. The craft was the prayer. The joint that held without glue was the proof that someone had cared enough to do it right, even in the dark, even where it did not matter, even where no one was watching. That was what her father had left her. Not the money, not the envelope, not even the building. He had left her the understanding that the things worth building are the things you build as if someone you love is going to open them up 100 years from now and see what you did. By April, the apartment upstairs was a home.
She had hung curtains in the windows, plain unbleached cotton she had bought at the dry goods store on Main Street. She had repainted the walls a warm cream. She had refinished the floorboards by hand, one section at a time on her knees with a scraper and 3 grades of sandpaper. The boards came up the color of dark tea. She had sealed them with a linseed oil finish Henry made for her himself out of supplies he kept in the back of the store. The same finish her father had used on the floors of the Colonial in 1995. The metal bed frame from the back room had been replaced with a simple wooden bed she and Henry had built out of leftover hickory. The lumpy floral sofa had been hauled out to the curb and replaced with a second-hand armchair Jean Alcott had given her from the library storage room. The dead sparrow near the radiator had been buried in the garden in November, the day after Dominic had come in a spot Elara had marked with a single flat stone. The dust was gone. The damp earth smell was gone. The carriage house smelled now like cedar shavings and wood smoke and the faint, sweet trace of the linseed oil finish. And that smell, Elara realized one morning while making coffee, was the smell of her father's workshop in 2014. It was a smell she had not been able to name when she had walked through the front door 6 months earlier. It was a smell she could name now. It was the smell of home. In May, she planted a garden along the south wall where her father's garden had been. Tomatoes, beans, a small patch of basil. She put in a single peony bush that Mrs. Langford had given her as a transplant from her own yard. By June, the garden was blooming and something else had begun. It started because of a boy named Nolan. Nolan was 14. He lived with his mother in a small apartment above the laundromat on Birch Street, on the side of Ashford that the tourists did not see and the Boxwood people did not think about. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father was not in the picture in any meaningful way. Nolan came into the library on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and sat in the back corner and did not read. He sat and he looked at the wall and he waited for the library to close because the library was warm and the apartment above the laundromat was not always warm and the library did not ask him any questions. Elara noticed him the way you notice a version of yourself. She did not approach him right away. She let him sit.
She let him be invisible because she understood the value of being invisible when you were 14, and your life was not the life you would have chosen. After 3 weeks, she set a book on the table next to him. She did not say anything. She just set it down and walked away. The next Tuesday, he was reading it. The week after that, he asked her a question about it. And then he asked another question. And then he asked a question about the tools on the pegboard in a photograph in a woodworking book he had found in the reference section. And then he asked another and another, and the questions did not stop. She heard her father in those questions. She heard the 6-year-old version of herself in Henry Pruitt's hardware store asking what every tool on the wall was for. She heard the engine of a mind that had not yet found the thing it was built to work on. She talked to Henry about it on a Saturday morning over coffee at the store counter. "There is a boy at the library," she said. "He asks questions the way I used to ask questions." Henry looked at her over his mug. He did not say anything for a moment. "Bring him by," he said. She brought Nolan to the store the following Saturday. Henry put him at the workbench in the back with a block of white pine and a coping saw and told him to cut a straight line. Nolan cut a crooked line. Henry handed him another block. Nolan cut a less crooked line. Henry handed him a third. By the 4th Saturday, Nolan's lines were straight. By the 6th, Henry was teaching him to read grain. By the 8th, Nolan was asking questions Henry had to think about before answering, which was. Henry told Elara afterward with something close to delight exactly the kind of question worth being asked. Elara watched them from the counter. Henry standing behind the boy with his arms crossed. Patient. Still. Waiting for the mistake, and then waiting for the correction, and then nodding once when the correction came. She watched, and she saw her father standing behind a younger Henry, 30 years ago, learning the same things in the same way. And she saw herself, 8 years old, on a stool at her father's workbench, watching sawdust fall from a hand plane like snow. The circle was completing itself. Father to friend, friend to daughter, daughter to boy. The craft was the thread, and the thread did not break. It only passed from hand to hand the way a good tool passes the handle, wearing smooth under each new palm, until the wood remembers everyone who ever held it. Jean Alcott noticed. She said something to Elara one afternoon as they were closing up the library. "You are like your father," Jean said. He could not stop teaching people either. Henry noticed too. He did not say anything about it directly, but one Saturday evening after Nolan had gone home, Elara saw Henry standing at the window of his store, watching the boy walk down Main Street with a piece of pine in his back pocket and a coping saw in a canvas bag Henry had given him. And Henry was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He did not know Elara was watching. She did not tell him she had seen. She did not see Dominic again. She did not see Marcus. The BMW and the Range Rover continued to come and go from the front of the Colonial.
The boxwoods continued to be clipped into perfect green pillows by a landscaping crew that pulled up in a white truck every other Wednesday. The lights came on at the Colonial in the evenings and went out at night. And the two brothers lived there behind their black shutters and their lion's head knocker, and they did not, as far as Elara could tell, ever again come down the gravel drive.
Whether it was the envelope in Gerald Whitmore's safe that kept them away, or whether it was Gerald's letter, or whether it was something Dominic had seen on her face in December, Elara did not know. She did not care. She had asked for distance. They were giving it to her. The reason was not her business. In late July, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Elara was cleaning out the small storage cupboard under the staircase in the carriage house when she found it.
It was tucked into the back corner of the cupboard behind a stack of old drop cloths, in a place that had not been disturbed in years. It was a length of copper pipe, capped at both ends about 2 feet long and 3 inches in diameter. The caps were soldered shut. She knew the moment her hand closed around it that she had not put it there. She also knew the moment she lifted it that her father had. She brought it out into the workshop. She set it on the workbench. She held it for a long moment. Then she walked down Main Street to Pruitt's Lumber and Supply, and she handed the pipe to Henry, and she said, "Open it for me, please." Henry looked at the pipe. He looked at her. "You sure?" he said. "Yes." He took it into the back of the store. He clamped it gently into a vise. He took a small reciprocating saw and cut very carefully just below the upper cap. The blade went through the solder. The cap came off. He turned the pipe upside down over a clean cloth on his bench. A roll of heavy paper slid out. The paper was yellowed at the edges. It had been rolled tightly. It was tied with a piece of butcher's twine. Henry handed it to her. "This is not mine to open," he said. Elara untied the twine. The roll uncurled in her hands. It was a set of architectural drawings, hand-drawn in pencil and ink. The paper was vellum. The lines were careful, exact. The lines of a man who had spent his life drawing buildings he intended to build. The drawings showed a small home, 2 stories, brick, a pitched slate roof, a south-facing garden along one wall, a kitchen with a wood stove, a deep porcelain sink, a small attic study with a dormer window, cabinets along the kitchen wall, mortise and tenon. She could see it in the detail of the joinery he had drawn. An apartment built lovingly room by room from the bones of a building someone else might have written off. The drawings showed the carriage house. The carriage house exactly as Elara had been rebuilding it room by room with Henry's guidance and her own 2 hands. In the corner of the title block, in her father's neat, slanting handwriting, was the date. October 14th, 2013. She had been 6 years old. Beneath the date was a single line of writing in the same careful hand. Restoration of carriage house at 400
12 Oak Haven for my daughter, Elara, to be built when she comes home."
Elara did not move for a long time. He had drawn this when she was 6 years old, years before he ever got sick, years before her brothers ever began to steal, years before the cancer had a name and a stage and a prognosis. He had known, not the details, not the specifics, but he had known the way a master builder knows where a piece of green lumber is going to crack. He had looked at his sons, and he had felt something deep in the grain of them, something that was not right, something that was going to give way under pressure. And he had not known when. And he had not known how. But he had known enough to sit down at his drafting table on a Saturday afternoon in October of 2013 with a 6-year-old daughter who was probably at that very moment asking him a question from somewhere in the house. And he had drawn the place where she would land. She had been building all year the building her father had built first on paper when she was a little girl. Henry very quietly put his hand on her shoulder. He did not squeeze. He did not pat. He just laid his hand there for a moment, the way her father would have. He was a hell of a man, Elara Henry said. He was, she said. They stood like that for a long minute. Then she rolled the drawings back up. She tied the twine. She walked them home through the warm Saturday streets of Ashford, and she hung the largest of them, the elevation drawing of the south face of the carriage house, in a simple cherry wood frame she made the next morning at Henry's bench. She hung it on the wall of the kitchen above the wood stove, where she would see it every time she made coffee. The following week, Henry came by the carriage house with his truck. He set a black metal toolbox on the workbench, and he stood back from it, and he looked at Elara, and he said, "Your father left this with me 18 months before he died. He told me to give it to you when you were ready. I cannot tell you when ready is, only you know that. But I think you are ready now." Elara looked at the toolbox. It was old, square, battered. The latches were brass and worn smooth from decades of use. A piece of brown paper had been folded and tucked under the handle. She lifted the paper. She unfolded it. The handwriting was square and steady and clear, written in pencil the way a man who had spent his whole life writing on lumber writes. "Elara, this box belonged to your father. He left it with me 18 months before he died. He told me to give it to you when you were ready. I cannot tell you when ready is, only you know that. Whatever you decide to do tomorrow, you should know that he wanted you to have his hammer back. Your father was a man who built things. So are you. You just do not know it yet. If you need me, the store opens at 7. Henry." She lifted the latches of the toolbox. She opened the lid. Inside, on a folded square of blue shop rag, lay her father's framing hammer. The handle was hickory. It was worn smooth and dark, by 30 years of his palm. The head was steel. The face was polished bright by use. His initials had been burned into the side of the handle in tiny, careful letters. TCC. Beneath the hammer, folded into a square of wax paper, was a photograph. She lifted it. It was a photograph of a man in work boots standing in a hospital corridor holding a newborn baby. The man's hands were large and rough, and there was something dried and gray on his knuckles, mortar she realized looking closer. Wet mortar that had dried on the drive to the hospital. The baby was wrapped in a white blanket. The baby's eyes were closed. The man's eyes were open, and they were looking at the baby with an expression that Alara had never seen in a photograph before, and that she recognized instantly, because it was the same expression she had seen on her father's face every single day of her life that she could remember. It was the face of a man looking at the best thing he had ever built. Beneath the photograph, on a scrap of paper torn from a carpenter's notepad in handwriting that shook but did not stop, were the last words her father had written for her. For spark plug. Build things that outlast you. I love you. Always. Dad. She lifted the hammer out of the box. It was heavier than she remembered. It fit her hand the way nothing had fit her hand in 3 years. She held it for a long time. Outside, through the high window, the late summer light came through the branches of the maple trees and fell across the workbench in long golden bars. She closed her fingers around her father's hammer, and somewhere deep inside her chest, in a place that had been quiet for a very long time, something that had been broken began very slowly to consider the shape of being whole. On a clear, cool morning in early October of the following year, exactly 1 year and a few days after she had stepped off a bus in Ashford with a cardboard box and $175, Alara Calloway stood at the bottom of the gravel drive and looked back at her house. The brick had been repointed. The slates on the roof were tight. The boarded windows had been replaced with hand-glazed panes Henry had helped her source from a salvage yard in Massachusetts. The ivy still grew up the east wall, but only where she had let it grow only as a frame. The wooden door she had unlocked a year ago was now stripped and oiled and gleaming. The brass key still worked. Along the south wall, her garden was going to seed in the gentle way late-season gardens do. The tomato vines had been pulled up. The basil had gone to flower. The peony bush from Mrs. Langford was settled in for its second winter. Smoke rose thin and gentle from the chimney of the wood stove in the kitchen. From the front of the Colonial, 200 feet away through the trees, came the distant sound of someone closing a car door. A man's voice. Dominic, maybe. Or Marcus. It did not matter. They had their house. She had her home. Henry's pickup pulled into the gravel drive behind her. He climbed out with a thermos and a paper bag from the bakery on the corner. Coffee, he said, and rye toast. I figured we would eat outside if you wanted. Yes, Alara said. They sat on the front step of the carriage house in the cool October sun. He poured her coffee into a ceramic mug. He passed her a slice of buttered rye on a square of wax paper. They ate quietly. The maple trees along the property line were turning red. The air smelled like wood smoke and cold stone and the last warmth of the year. After a while, Henry said, "You know what your father told me once." "What?" "He told me that the difference between an inheritance and a legacy is that an inheritance is something you are given. A legacy is something you become." He took a sip of his coffee. "He said you were going to be his legacy, not his inheritance." He was pretty clear about the distinction. Elara looked out across the graveled drive at the maples turning red along the property line. She thought about her two brothers in the colonial. She thought about what they had been given: the 5-bedroom house, the bank accounts, the remains of their father's company, the Lion's Head knocker, the black BMW, the Range Rover. She thought about what she had been given: a roof that needed fixing, a man named Henry Pruitt, a drawing in a copper pipe, a father's hammer, a choice. She thought about which of those two piles in the long arc of a life was the heavier one. "They got the inheritance," she said quietly. "Yes," Henry said. "I got the legacy." "Yes." For the first time in my life, Elara Calloway said, "I understand the difference." She wrapped both hands around her warm mug of coffee. The wind moved through the maples. The smoke rose from the chimney behind her, and somewhere inside the small brick building her father had drawn for her when she was 6 years old. The building she had spent a year putting back together with her own 2 hands, the building no one had thought was worth fighting for. A clock ticked steadily forward into the rest of her life.